Hi guys, it's Debbie, and today I can finally speak about Joker, the new masterpiece by Todd Phillips we've all been eagerly awaiting since the first promotional material had surfaced online. Don't worry, because this video will be completely spoiler free, so nothing will be ruined if you haven't seen the film yet, although I would highly recommend watching it, because if I had to condense all my thoughts into one concept, one sentence, I would say that at this point in time, this is my favourite film of 2019, and I don't usually give anything away until right at the end of December. Joker is one of those rare films that keep audiences engaged from beginning to end. There is not even one scene I would consider superfluous, that I would disdain or consider irrelevant for the plot. It's perfect on a screenplay level for the acting, the soundtrack, the cinematography, and in this context which is saturated of films that rarely leave something memorable to the viewer, just weighing in the option of cashing in as much as possible, Joker is a rare gem, which I believe will become very quickly a cult film to be watched over and over in the next years, because it has something meaningful regardless of the time in which it is seen. Before getting right into the details of why I enjoyed this film so much, there are a couple of concepts I would like to cover. The first is that what I would like to heavily underline that this is absolutely not your usual classic film based on DC Comics, set within a shared universe or set within a context of similar films. A film like that, for example, would be Justice League, Batman vs Superman, or in the Marvel world, any, for example, of the Avengers films. Joker is a standalone project which draws inspiration from a comic book character, but which can be viewed just on its own. So yes, it is the Joker, yes, it is set in Gotham, yes, it draws inspiration from that world, but you should definitely not expect something predictable, something you have already seen, and definitely no superpowers or supernatural elements. And this decision becomes a totally immersive cinematic experience, as themes such as violence, anger, mental health are more adequate topics than those we were used to, such as smiley superheroes ready to save away the day and defeat the evil monster in one go. And this realism is what makes it also frightening. A few months ago, when I saw the first Joker trailer, I expressed my fear in seeing a totally exhaustive explanation to the Joker's origins, as his past, because of its bizarre, chaotic and mysterious nature, has never been revealed, if not in a contradictory manner by the character himself. A very easy example is Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight, who gave various explanations to why he had his scars. But this 2019 Joker can be easily watched as a completely separate project from its classic universe. It could be seen and appreciated even by who isn't even aware of the existence of the Joker, in addition to the fact that this film is completely unpredictable. By watching the trailers and knowing more or less about the character's environment, I had formed an idea of what I expected to see in the film, and then I expected that this idea would have then been surprised by other elements, but instead I was surprised by an even more innovative, interesting and engaging story than I would have ever expected. But at the same time, for those who are fans of that world, there are references to the source material which make it very emotional. A similar idea, not the same, don't get me wrong, and I'll explain why, was undertaken again by the DC team with the new Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot. The group had decided to start working on more standalone projects that maybe have a sequel, that maybe have references to other characters from other films, but that are autonomous projects, not a series of sequels one after the other like the Marvel films. In the case of Wonder Woman, there are still many classic aspects of the character, from her attire, her story, her powers, and of course there's a cosmic difference acting-wise. But the film can still be viewed by anybody, even those who are not familiar with the character, even because then Diana is taken from her world and set in the hyper-realistic one of a world war. So to sum it up, and I hate speaking of the eternal Marvel versus DC dilemma, which makes us look like kids in the playground fighting over which Power Ranger is the strongest, but on the spectrum that ranges, say, from the latest Avengers films to a normal drama, excuse the term, Joker is obviously more on this end. As a matter of fact, the story's protagonist is Arthur Fleck, a man who is dealing with all a series of psychological issues. Without getting into spoilers, let's say that already in the trailer he tells the social worker who follows him that he doesn't have anything except bad thoughts. The environment in which he lives is a totally degraded Gotham City, a little like a 70s New York, the one we see in Taxi Driver, which I will speak about later on in this video. The streets are ridden with violence and citizens live in a total state of depression. Arthur is struggling to balance his work as a clown with caring for his mother in their rundown apartment, and life keeps tormenting him, from kids pestering him on the streets to bigger and more continuous problems that just keep on piling up. The setting of the film then greatly emphasizes the whole situation of abandonment and general decay, with elements such as the filth of the city itself, with mounds of garbage, rat infestations, run-down filthy buildings. Everything looks wet and cold, just like the setting of other films, other dark films such as Seven, in which we barely see a ray of sunshine or a form of warmth throughout the whole film, because that represents the theme of the movie. Arthur has become totally a part of this environment, which, by the way, is only lit up by two main colours, blue and red, with the odd touch of green. Everything in the film, from the city lights to the apartment's interiors, from Arthur's clothes to the curtains of the TV show he watches to the police lights, all follow these two colours, because Arthur and the city become one and all, and they both progressively become ever more filthy, ever more violent, ever more barbaric. Even the soundtrack plays a very important element in emphasizing the pain suffered by the city, suffered by Arthur. It's very agonizing, nearly suffocating. By the way, the soundtrack was created by the same composer who was behind the soundtrack for the Chernobyl series, which speaks about the Chernobyl disaster, but is based on all the anxiety, the fear, the depression surrounding the disaster. But returning to the plot, so although Arthur is becoming part of the city, at the same time he still wants to get out of it. He wants to get out of this society that he doesn't understand, that doesn't understand him. He always says how his mother tells him that he is meant to bring joy and smiles to the world. He enjoys being a comedian. He dreams of being a famous comedian, of being noticed, of bringing happiness. And in those moments, the soundtrack actually changes. It becomes more upbeat, nearly out of place, just like Arthur's behavior is totally unpredictable. There are some tracks we're definitely not expecting. So the fundamental feature of the character that became the story's winning element is the emotional charge Joaquin Phoenix gave to Joker. Arthur's anger and mental deterioration are superbly carried out. Phoenix took a character we believe that we knew everything about and gave him a totally new look. From the way he dances, nearly like a contortionist, from the way he laughs. Arthur is not simply a crazy man. He is somebody with a series of issues who made some bad decisions based on what he went through. So here comes the eternal dilemma on whether this is understandable. Not acceptable, not correct, but understandable. Society should have never let him reach that point. We'll probably never understand what pain a character is going through. By the way, speaking on this topic, a few years back, Oliver Stone made a film called Natural Born Killers, which, as the title implies, speaks about killers, specifically a deranged couple who was roaming the roads of America, brutally murdering dozens and dozens of people. Now, this couple seems completely lunatic, but the woman of the two grew up in a household in which she was sexually abused by her father, in which she was mistreated by her whole family, with her mother even just pretended she never saw anything. So when a crazy stranger, her future boyfriend, turns up proposing the idea of killing everybody and escaping with him, she understandably is weak and accepts everything. Obviously, killing dozens of people is not the solution to the problem, but we can see how disenchanted she is towards society, just as Arthur is towards Gotham. Because of these dilemmas, Joker remains a film which is open to interpretation of the single viewer, because every person has a different opinion regarding the topics that are covered in the film, so each of us has a unique interpretation for it. It is an individual experience right until the last shot. Joaquin Phoenix then channeled all of Arthur's pain with a series of acting elements that nearly make us part of his pain, that make us feel uneasy when we see him, as if we were powerless, guilty, unable to help him. For example, in one scene, Arthur is facing a very tough discussion. Throughout this discussion, he just pulls his face into a smile with his cheeks right up, his eyes wide open. He doesn't blink, they are red, they are crying, and he just keeps pushing his face more and more and more, while the other person is talking, to the point that it looks nearly like a demonic smile. And in other scenes, there are very violent outbursts that are followed not long after by an attitude a kid would have after realizing he had gone too far with his wrongdoings. But as the film progresses, anger takes over with some ghastly scenes of absolute psychological terror which look worthy of a true horror film. These are simple examples because I'm afraid of revealing too many spoilers, but essentially all his character is minutely curated. His pain is so strong to even having audiences crying. I think that Phoenix in general has a great ability of conveying emotions, whichever they may be. Something that may sound obvious in cinema, but which it really isn't. Take any James Bond or Mission Impossible films, if the characters are not conveying anger, rage, love, anxiety throughout the carrying out of the action, then it's just a simple story. That is just one of the many differences which distinguish any plain action film. I don't know, even just a Fast and Furious film from, let's say, Inception. One of the many details. Instead, we could take any simple story, and those of you who have been following me for a while will hate me by again giving this example, but Manchester by the Sea. It's a film with a very simple plot, but which becomes incredibly engaging because of the acting, which is all based on emotions. If we think of the range of emotions Joaquin Phoenix has been able to convey, he has been in romantic films such as Her, in which he has fallen in love with an artificial intelligence, and in which he shows a completely different side from the one we see now in Joker, but which is still rich in emotions, breakdowns, romantic exuberance. In The Master, which I would highly recommend if you liked Phoenix in Joker, we have a war veteran who is struggling to resettle in society and who ends up managing very badly his emotions and behaviors. We have Phoenix laughing, screaming in rage, slapping himself in a range of 10 seconds. One of the characters who is opposite Phoenix in Joker, and who I was very curious about, is Robert De Niro, who takes on the role of a comedian who brightens Arthur's evenings, as even after the worst days, he finds some joy in watching the comedy sketches, dreaming of being part of them. But it's actually a strong reference to a film De Niro was in now about 40 years ago, which was The King of Comedy, in which he played an aspiring comedian who pesters a famous TV presenter, insisting that his material is brilliant and desperately asking to appear on the show. But the simple act of being annoying soon becomes a torment that then develops into inappropriate, exaggerated, and criminal behaviors. Upon watching the Joker trailers, I actually expected this to be the biggest reference throughout the whole film, as Arthur does have this desire of stepping out of his anonymity, of being noticed by people, of making them smile. And then we have De Niro on the opposite side of his older character. But as I was saying earlier, this film surprised me in many ways I was not expecting. Even just the concept of the comedy show becomes irony about society that ignores real problems to give more importance to easy jokes said by a stranger who just happens to be famous and on TV. If we really have to draw comparisons, there is a lot of Taxi Driver here, again with Robert De Niro. Now, Taxi Driver is the story of a taxi driver who is dealing with a series of psychological issues, even due to the fact that he is a war veteran. Living and working in a degraded, criminality-packed 70s New York, very similar to Arthur's Gotham, every encounter becomes a struggle for the character. It becomes another hit to his psychosis, which degenerates over the course of the film. So there are many similarities with Joker, both based on the personality of the two characters, but also their reference to how this actually all happens. For example, with characters at home, alone, tormented by their issues, playing out imaginary situations. But regardless of references to other works, Joker presents a totally new version of the character. As a matter of fact, although in the film there are moments dedicated to Heath Ledger's work on the characters, I believe a comparison between the two is unnecessary. It's the question we all want an answer to, the question we shouldn't really ask, but the one we can't not help but asking, and that is Heath Ledger versus Joaquin Phoenix. I believe Joaquin Phoenix elevated his acting style nearly to the level of Heath Ledger's, but they are two completely opposite works. The two Jokers have nothing to do with one another, so the comparison is rather irrelevant, and we don't necessarily need to find a way to do it. But what Heath Ledger had begun with Christopher Nolan, and what is now being brought forward by Todd Phillips, is elevating something such as a comic book to an award-winning project, to a form of art. I'm not speaking of something like Black Panther, which for how good it was, went to the Oscars more as a popularity prize. I'm speaking of taking something that's a concept that has always been relegated to the kids section and giving it an award, because I am sure that in a few months, Joaquin Phoenix, Todd Phillips, the Joker will all be along nominees of some much bigger prizes. So, to sum up this video, which by now is probably very, very long, I would highly recommend watching the Joker. As a matter of fact, I want to know if you've already seen it, if you have, what you thought about it. If you haven't seen it, what you're expecting. Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.